Vanessa Cole was never the reckless type. At 33, she had built a life grounded in order, intention, and quiet perseverance. She worked full-time as a diagnostic sonographer at a women's health clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and allowed her to live comfortably in a two-bedroom condo on the south side of town. Her days were long but predictable, filled with appointments, charts, and back-to-back ultrasounds. Nights were quieter, Netflix, a bit of red wine, and texts from the man she thought she'd grow old with. His name was Marcus Wynn. They met in 2017 on a dating app. His profile had been refreshingly normal. No shirtless gym photos, no vague entrepreneur nonsense. Just a 35-year-old event coordinator with a crooked smile, a dog named Casper, and a surprisingly witty bio. I plan weddings for strangers. Just looking for one of my own. They clicked instantly. Their first date lasted 5 hours. By the end of that same week, Marcus had already introduced her to his favorite taco spot and started texting her good morning before she even got out of bed. He was attentive, funny, confident without being cocky. Vanessa had dated before, plenty of men, but something about Marcus felt different. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened. When she talked about student debt and saving for a house, he didn't flinch or change the subject. He leaned in. By the following spring, he'd moved into her condo. Marcus claimed to travel frequently for work, mostly weekend events in Atlanta, Richmond, and sometimes even D.C. He said he managed high-end logistics for corporate retreats and private weddings. He never stayed away for more than 4 days. Always came home with charming stories and branded keychains from hotel lobbies. Vanessa never questioned it. They talked long-term early. By late 2018, Marcus brought up the idea of buying a house together. "We're just throwing money at rent," he'd said one night, spreading mortgage calculators across the kitchen island. "We could be building equity by now." Vanessa was all in. Together, they mapped out their dream. A 3-bedroom craftsman with a yard for Casper, maybe something on the edge of town. Marcus offered to manage the down payment fund. "Let's keep it separate so we don't dip into it by accident," he suggested. "I'll set up a savings account just for the house. You can transfer your half each month, and I'll do the same." It sounded reasonable. Vanessa agreed and began sending $1,500 at the start of every month. Sometimes Marcus would show her screenshots of the account's progress, clean, upward trending numbers that felt like hope. "Almost at $20,000, he'd text with a little house emoji. "Stay strong, baby. We're getting close." Vanessa adjusted her lifestyle accordingly. No more weekend getaways, no new handbags, no impulse brunches with her girlfriends. When coworkers planned a girls' trip to Cancun, she stayed behind and picked up extra shifts instead. It wasn't about sacrifice. It was about vision. They were building something together. Their home stayed modest. The same scratched dining table they'd found on Facebook Marketplace, the hand-me-down couch from her sister, the mismatched dishes they never got around to replacing. Vanessa took that as a sign of shared financial discipline. "We're focused," she'd remind herself on quiet evenings when Marcus was away on business. They even started attending open houses on Saturdays. Marcus had a spreadsheet tracking school zones, price trends, and property taxes. He talked about hardwood floors and double vanities like a man who'd already seen the blueprint of their future. The only thing missing was a ring. Occasionally, Vanessa would allow herself to dream about it. Something simple, maybe rose gold, nothing flashy. But Marcus would just smile and say, "One thing at a time. Let's build the foundation first." And she believed him. After all, he always came home. Even when his absences stretched longer, 4 nights instead of 2, he never gave her reason to doubt. He called every night. He sent photos from venues, centerpieces being arranged, linen swatches, LED setups. She even followed his business on Instagram, When Event Solutions. The feed was filled with curated wedding shots and hashtag posts from grateful brides. She was proud of him. She imagined how someday their own home would look, with their wedding photos hanging in the hallway and the ultrasound images of their future child framed above the fireplace. She pictured Marcus carrying boxes through the front door of their dream house, maybe whispering, "We made it." But she never imagined how fast it could all unravel, and how much of it had never been real in the first place. It started like any other Thursday night. Vanessa had just finished folding a load of laundry, the hum of the dryer fading into the background as she settled onto the couch with a glass of wine. The house felt quiet, too quiet. Marcus was in Atlanta for a weekend conference, or so he'd said. He'd left that morning with a duffel bag, a kiss on her cheek, and the usual, "I'll call you before bed, babe." But it was nearly 10 p.m., and her phone was still silent. She scrolled absent-mindedly through the smart TV menu, looking for something to distract her. A news show, a baking competition, anything. The YouTube app opened automatically. As it loaded, the recommended videos flashed across the screen. And then she saw it. A perfect day in Asheville wedding highlight reel. Uploaded 3 weeks ago. The thumbnail caught her breath. The man in the gray suit looked familiar, painfully familiar. Same square jaw, same neatly trimmed beard, same slightly crooked smile that had charmed her 5 years ago in a crowded cafe. Her thumb hovered over the remote. It couldn't be. She clicked. The video opened with sweeping drone footage of a lakeside venue, complete with strings of Edison bulbs and a floral arch swaying gently in the breeze. Soft piano music played. Guests were laughing, clinking champagne glasses. Then the camera panned to the groom, Marcus Wynn, standing at the altar, beaming, as a young brunette in a white lace gown approached him with tears in her eyes. The officiant's voice rang out clear. "Do you, Marcus Elijah Wynn, take Janelle Rivers to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Vanessa didn't move. She didn't blink. The glass of wine trembled in her hand. She watched the full video twice. There was no ambiguity, no room for excuses. This wasn't some old footage. The video had been posted 3 weeks ago. The wedding date, August 27th, 2021, was clearly displayed on the end credits. That was the same weekend Marcus told her he'd been in Nashville for a corporate expo. He'd been getting married. Vanessa's brain moved on autopilot. She opened her laptop, logging into the joint budgeting app they both used. She pulled up the payment history, the transfer she had sent every month for. The past 3 years. Nothing had changed. Each $1,500 debit was there, religiously scheduled on the first of every month. But now, it didn't feel like hope. They felt like betrayal with a routing number. She clicked into their old texts. Countless conversations about open houses, Zillow listings, mortgage calculators. She scrolled until her fingers hurt. Each message a time-stamped reminder that she had been planning a life with a man who already had another. Just to confirm the madness, she called the credit union Marcus had mentioned when he first set up the house fund. After 2 automated menus and a 15-minute hold, a representative picked up. Vanessa asked about the account under Marcus Wynn's name. There was a pause. The representative told her, politely but firmly, that the account had been closed. It had been closed 2 months earlier. Without her knowledge. Without a single word. Vanessa hung up, numb. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she waited. Waited for the sound of keys in the door, the soft jingle of Casper's collar, the voice she used to love calling, "Babe, I'm home." Around midnight, it finally came. Marcus walked in, still wearing the same black hoodie he'd left in that morning. Vanessa was already in the living room. The wedding video paused on the TV screen behind her. He stopped cold. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she asked, voice low and shaking, "Do you know what this is?" Marcus stared at the screen. His jaw twitched. Then he dropped his duffel on the floor and let out a breath. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. Vanessa laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you married someone 3 weeks ago while telling me we were saving for a house." He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked down, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's complicated, Ness. You wouldn't understand. Try me." But he didn't. He picked up his bag and moved toward the hallway. Vanessa stood. "Where are you going?" I need time." "You're upset." She followed him, her voice rising. "You lied to me for years. You took my money, my time, my life, and gave it to someone else. You don't get to need time, Marcus. I gave you years." He paused at the doorway, looked at her with unreadable eyes. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." And then he left. Just like that. By morning, he had blocked her on every platform. Phone, email, social media. Even a shared budgeting app was deactivated. He was gone, and Vanessa was left standing in the ruins of a life she thought they were building together. But as the silence settled in, something else stirred beneath the grief. Anger. Not the wild kind, but a cold, steady fire. She had been conned, deceived, and discarded. But she wasn't going to let him disappear quietly. Not this time. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room with Casper curled beside her, replaying the wedding video on mute over and over again, as if a new frame might change the ending. But it didn't. The man who once kissed her forehead each morning had kissed another woman at the altar, and he'd done it without hesitation. By dawn, her grief had hardened into something sharper. Purpose. She began gathering everything: bank statements, text messages, screenshots, voice notes, even photos of the open houses they'd toured together. The transfer history alone spanned more than 40 pages. Every single $1,500 monthly payment was marked clearly. Vanessa tallied it up, $72,000. She drove to the Charlotte Police Department that same morning, clutching a folder thick with evidence. The woman at the front desk took her name and referred her to a financial crimes officer. She was hopeful, briefly, but the meeting left her cold. "There's no formal agreement between you two?" Officer Darnell asked, flipping through her folder. "No," she admitted. "We were partners. I trusted him." He sighed. "I understand this is emotional, but if there's no legal document tying those funds to a promise or contract, it falls under a civil dispute. Technically, you gave him the money voluntarily." Vanessa blinked. "So he can just steal it, lie, get married to someone else, and it's not a crime? If he misrepresented his intentions, you could pursue civil fraud. But criminal charges would be difficult unless we find forged documents or coercion." She left the precinct furious. Later that afternoon, she made an appointment with a civil attorney, Angela Parks, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s who specialized in personal financial disputes and asset recovery. Angela wore a navy blazer, spoke quickly, and took notes with a red pen. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When Vanessa finished, Angela leaned back and said, "This isn't just about money. This is a pattern. And if he's done this to you, chances are you're not the only one." Angela requested access to Vanessa's digital communications and banking history. Together, they built a timeline. She also made contact with a clerk in Buncombe County, North Carolina, where Asheville is located. Within a week, they confirmed the marriage license. Marcus Elijah Wynn had legally married Janelle Rivers on August 27, 2021. That same clerk noted something strange. Marcus had used a business address on the application. A quick search showed it was tied to an LLC named Crescent Logistics Group, registered in Atlanta, Georgia. The business had no website, no contact number, no staff listings. Just a mailbox. It was a shell. Angela hired a private data investigator who ran Marcus's information through national databases. What they found made Vanessa's skin crawl. Marcus Wynn had at least two other active aliases, Derek Miles and Jay Carter, and had filed for business licenses under both names in Georgia and Tennessee. One business claimed to offer digital branding solutions. The other was listed as Event Strategy Consultation. But both addresses were rented P.O. boxes. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Marcus had been living multiple lives. One evening, unable to sleep, Vanessa opened a Reddit forum on relationship scams. She posted anonymously, detailing her story in vague terms. Within days, she received 2 private messages from women who claimed they'd experienced something eerily similar. The first was Brielle Thompson, a school counselor from Savannah, Georgia. She said she dated a man named Jay Carter from 2016 to 2019. "He told me we were saving for a wedding," she wrote. "I gave him almost $40,000 over 3 years. Then one day, he ghosted me. Just vanished." The second woman, Marina Lopez from Nashville, had known him as Derek Miles. Her story mirrored Vanessa's in chilling detail. Long-term relationship, shared financial goals, monthly contributions toward a future, and then silence. Angela contacted both women and gathered written affidavits. The law firm amended Vanessa's original civil complaint to include intentional misrepresentation, interstate wire fraud, and emotional financial grooming. Terms rarely seen in court filings, but ones that Angela insisted were necessary. As momentum built, Angela and her team sent an anonymous packet to Janelle Rivers, the woman Marcus had recently married. The packet included Vanessa's payment history, the wedding video screenshots, and social media posts cross-referenced with Marcus's travel dates. There was no reply. But 2 days later, Janelle's public Instagram account was wiped clean, her catering business page disabled, and all posts featuring Marcus disappeared. It was confirmation. Meanwhile, the investigation continued. Angela submitted subpoenas for Marcus's telecom records and discovered he had been juggling 3 different phone numbers, all registered under variations of his legal name or through business accounts tied to Crescent Logistics Group. One phone pinged regularly in Charlotte, another in Atlanta, a third, surprisingly, in Dallas, Texas. Vanessa sat across from Angela a week later as they reviewed a new report showing Marcus had recently filed for another LLC in Texas, this time under the name Anthony Gray. "Whoever this man is," Angela said, sliding the paper across the desk, "he's not done yet." Vanessa didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her eyes dry. There were no tears left. She had been robbed of money, yes, but also a belief, of the idea that love, once given freely, wouldn't be turned into a weapon. But now she had something else. Proof. And she was ready to burn it all down. Dallas, Texas was supposed to be his clean slate. Marcus Wynn, or rather, Anthony Gray, as he now called himself, had rented a sleek, modern condo on the outskirts of Plano under falsified paperwork. He lived in Unit 4B of a gated complex where no one asked too many questions and most neighbors kept to themselves. The lease was signed with a driver's license that listed a non-existent Georgia address and a business registration number tied to Apex Consulting Solutions, another shell company. From the outside, he was just another remote working entrepreneur. He ordered cold brew from local cafes, jogged 3 miles every morning, and gave polite nods to anyone who held the elevator door. No one knew the man in Unit 4B was wanted across multiple states. No one knew the trail of broken lives he left behind. But Vanessa knew, and so did Angela. With mounting evidence and multiple sworn affidavits from victims, Angela submitted everything to the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation, which escalated it to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Within a month, a multi-state federal warrant was issued for Marcus Wynn, alias Derek Miles, Jay Carter, and now Anthony Gray. The feds moved quietly. On April 2nd, 2022, a joint task force made up of U.S. Marshals and local Texas law enforcement surveilled the property. For 2 days, they tracked Marcus's movements. They confirmed his routine: morning run, late-night phone calls on the balcony, packages arriving under 3 different names. At 6:42 a.m. on April 4th, they moved in. He was arrested without incident, still in gym shorts and a hoodie, holding a protein shake. Inside the condo, authorities found what they later described as a digital fraud lab. 6 mobile phones, all active, each with different SIM cards. 2 passports, 1 real, 1 forged. 3 laptops with encryption software. A locked briefcase containing printed spreadsheets with victim initials, dates, and dollar amounts. Fake lease agreements, LLC registration forms, and prepaid debit cards totaling over $8,000 in untraceable funds. One spreadsheet had a column labeled Projected ROI, Relationship Tier 3. The initials VC, Vanessa Cole, and BT, Brielle Thompson, appeared side by side. Next to Vanessa's name, $72,000, complete. But perhaps the most haunting discovery was a list of future targets: names, ages, estimated incomes, and cities. There were at least 7 entries. He was planning to do it again. Marcus was extradited to Charlotte, where he was booked into federal custody at the Mecklenburg County Jail. When the news broke, local outlets picked up the story, dubbing him the relationship grifter. Reddit threads exploded. Women from other states began coming forward. The charges came swiftly: wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, use of false documentation in furtherance of crime. Interstate financial exploitation. Operating shell businesses for illicit personal gain. No bail was granted. The judge deemed him a high-flight risk with a clear pattern of deception and multiple false identities. Vanessa was notified of the arrest by Angela. She didn't cry. She just exhaled, slow and deep, for what felt like the first time in months. The next day, she walked into the U.S. District Courthouse in a gray pantsuit and sat silently in the back row as Marcus was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and chains on his wrists. His face was calm, too calm. He looked around the courtroom briefly, his eyes scanning the gallery. They met hers, but Vanessa didn't flinch. When the judge asked if he understood the charges against him, Marcus simply said, "Yes, Your Honor." When asked for a plea, he answered, "Not guilty." The court set a trial date for July 12, 2022. In the weeks that followed, the investigation widened. Janelle Rivers, the woman Marcus had married under his legal name, was contacted by prosecutors. She agreed to cooperate. Her statements painted a familiar picture. Marcus had used her catering company's tax ID to open business credit lines, funneled funds into accounts she never had access to, and used her personal information to file false tax returns. "I didn't know who I married," she told agents, "and I'm not sure I ever really did." Investigators cross-checked Marcus's travel history with bank transfers and communications. The pattern was damning. Relationships overlapping, funds funneled between accounts, and deception layered with stunning precision. Angela worked with Vanessa to compile a comprehensive victim profile, eventually identifying a sixth woman in Ohio and a seventh in Louisiana. Each followed the same formula: charm, connection, talk of the future, financial entanglement, sudden vanishing act. As Vanessa scrolled through the evidence folder one night, files, maps, statements, she whispered to herself, he didn't just lie. He strategized. What once felt like heartbreak had become a blueprint for exploitation. But now that blueprint was exposed, and the man behind it was in a cage. By the time July 12th arrived, the courthouse was at full capacity. Reporters had camped outside since sunrise, cameras rolling, microphones in hand, waiting for a glimpse of the man, now known across state lines as the relationship grifter. Inside the U.S. District Court for the Western District of North Carolina, the atmosphere was electric. Tension laced every seat, every bench, every quiet breath held in anticipation. Vanessa Cole sat in the front row of the public gallery. She wore a navy dress and a silver necklace that had once been a gift from Marcus, now a quiet act of reclaiming. Beside her sat attorney Angela Parks, calm and composed, her legal pad already open, pen uncapped. When the courtroom doors opened and Marcus Wynn was let in, the room fell silent. He wore a dark suit, loaned by his public defender's office, his hands no longer shackled but resting stiffly at his sides. His expression was unreadable, neither defiant nor remorseful, just blank, as if this wasn't about him at all. The prosecution wasted no time. Their opening statement painted Marcus as a man who had weaponized intimacy, creating multiple identities, forming romantic relationships built on deception, and siphoning financial resources under the illusion of shared futures. This is not a case of love gone wrong. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana McClure began, her voice steady but firm. This is financial predation disguised as commitment. Mr. Wynn didn't just lie. He strategized. He manipulated. And he left behind a trail of shattered trust and empty bank accounts. The prosecution introduced a timeline that spanned nearly a decade, beginning in 2013 and ending with his arrest in April 2022. The flowcharts displayed on monitors showed cross-reference financial transfers, IP location data, and the identities Marcus used in Georgia, Tennessee, Wisconsin, Texas, and North Carolina. Each name came with a corresponding woman. Each woman had a story. Vanessa was called to the stand on day 2. She walked slowly to the witness box, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She was sworn in, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the jury. For the next 3 hours, Vanessa recounted everything. How she met Marcus, the promises he made, the budget spreadsheets, the sacrifices. She described each monthly transfer, each moment of hope, each carefully placed lie. "He made it feel real," she said quietly. "He didn't just take my money. He took my peace. My future." The jury watched her closely. Some took notes. Others simply stared. The prosecution presented text messages between Vanessa and Marcus discussing neighborhoods, down payment strategies, and property taxes. Each text was time-stamped and matched with bank statements showing her transfers. They also showed the wedding video, the same one that had shattered Vanessa's world. It played on a monitor facing the jury, muted but unmistakable. Vanessa kept her gaze forward, expression still. When cross-examined, the defense tried to imply her financial contributions had been voluntary, part of a mutual arrangement without legal documentation. There were no signed contracts, the defense attorney pressed. No joint accounts. "Isn't it true that you chose to send the money each month?" "Yes," Vanessa replied, "but I chose it based on a lie. He made me believe we were building a life, and he was already building one with someone else." The courtroom was still. Janelle Rivers testified the following day. She appeared calm, but there was a cold fire in her voice. She told the court how Marcus had married her under his real name, used her catering business as a front to open credit lines, and siphoned over $50,000 through her company's accounts. "He used my EIN to fake tax returns," she said. "He took out a business lease in my name and maxed out the company card without my knowledge." When asked if she had ever suspected he was living a second life, Janelle shook her head. "No. He even framed photos of us in the hallway. It was all fake, and I didn't see it until it was too late." Two more women took the stand, Brielle Thompson from Savannah and Marina Lopez from Nashville. Both shared eerily similar experiences: whirlwind romance, shared dreams, financial entanglement, and sudden abandonment. "I gave him everything I had saved for my daughter's college fund," Brielle said, "because he said he wanted to build a home for us." Marina brought printed messages from Derek Miles that matched the same language Marcus had used with Vanessa. The jury was shown a chart with reused phrases. "Let's build together. This is our year. Every sacrifice now is worth our future later." Each line was found in text sent to multiple women. A digital forensic analyst presented the contents of Marcus's laptops and phones. He confirmed that Marcus maintained fake LLCs, fabricated bank screenshots, and even sample lease agreements with forged signatures. One file, labeled contributions_2021.xlsx, listed initials, dollar amounts, and notes like terminated, still active, and awaiting exit. Vanessa's initials, VC, were listed next to $72,000 with the note, "Exit successful." The defense leaned heavily on a narrative of emotional instability. They portrayed Marcus as a flawed but non-malicious man who became overwhelmed by financial stress and made bad choices to maintain appearances. "He never threatened these women," the defense argued. "He didn't force them. There were no weapons, no violence. This is not fraud, it's heartbreak." But the jury wasn't buying it. By the second week, the prosecution rested. Closing arguments underscored the intentionality of Marcus's actions. The careful aliases, the shell companies, the methodical targeting of emotionally vulnerable but financially stable women. "He didn't break their hearts," McClure said. "He engineered their trust. Then he monetized it." On July 25th, the jury deliberated for just over 5 hours. At 6:42 p.m., the foreperson stood and read the verdict aloud. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation across state lines. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood still as the judge thanked the jury, revoked all bail options, and scheduled sentencing for September 19th, 2022. Vanessa sat motionless as the marshals escorted him out in handcuffs. She didn't feel victory. Not yet. But she felt closure, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. But closure, as Vanessa quickly learned, was not the same as peace. That night, alone in her apartment, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, her body still but her thoughts racing like a freight train. Every creak in the floorboards outside her unit made her tense. Every buzz of her phone sent her heart leaping into her throat, even though it was usually just a calendar notification or a spam email. For months, her brain had lived on high alert, hypervigilant, emotionally wired for betrayal. That didn't stop just because the gavel fell. At 3:14 a.m., she sat up suddenly, heart pounding, drenched in sweat from a nightmare she couldn't quite recall. Only fragments remained. Marcus's face in a crowd, her bank account flashing zero, a wedding aisle lined with lies. She got up and wandered the apartment barefoot, eventually settling on the small balcony with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a mug of peppermint tea she didn't finish. The city below was still, but her mind wasn't. She'd won, technically. But why did it still feel like she'd lost something irreversible? In therapy later that week, she tried to explain it. It's like, my brain doesn't know we're safe now, she told Dr. Elgin, her trauma counselor. It keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop. Except the shoes already crushed me. Dr. Elgin nodded. That's not unusual. It's called anticipatory trauma. Your nervous system got trained to expect deceit. Now it needs time and permission to unlearn it. Vanessa stared out the office window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Do you think I'll ever trust someone again? A long pause. Then, I think you'll learn how to trust yourself again. That comes first. The word stuck with her. That night, Vanessa took a quiet inventory of what had survived. Her integrity, her instincts, however bruised, her voice, and maybe, on the quietest level, her hope. She wasn't ready to date. Not for a long time. But she was ready to stop seeing herself as collateral damage. She closed her laptop, silenced her phone, and sat down with a pen and journal she hadn't opened since 2020. On the first blank page, she wrote, I was not foolish for loving him. He was criminal for using it. Then she closed the book, placed it beside her bed, and finally, slept. Not because the storm had passed, but because she had stopped trying to outpace it. The courtroom was quieter this time. On September 19th, 2022, nearly 2 months after the guilty verdict, Vanessa Cole once again sat in the gallery of the U.S. District Court in Charlotte. This time, there were fewer reporters, fewer bystanders. No cameras lined the courthouse steps. But the weight of the moment was heavier than ever. It wasn't about guilt anymore. That had been decided. It was about justice. When Marcus Wynn was led into the room, his hair was slightly longer, his beard more grown in. His suit was gone, replaced by a standard orange jumpsuit and a dull stare. He looked around briefly, but this time his eyes didn't search for Vanessa. He stared ahead, unreadable. Judge Eleanor Wexler, a seasoned federal judge with a reputation for empathy and firmness, presided. She reviewed the case history aloud for the record. 9 confirmed victims in 6 states. Total known financial loss exceeding $223,000. With additional investigations still open. Then she invited victim impact statements. Vanessa stood slowly when her name was called. She walked to the podium, her heels echoing softly in the stillness, and looked directly at the man who had, for years, built a lie around her life. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. I didn't come here for revenge, she said, her voice steady. I came for recognition, not just for what I lost financially, but for everything else you took. My confidence, my trust, my sense of reality. She paused briefly, then added, but you didn't break me, and you don't get to define the rest of my life. Judge Wexler thanked her and asked if the defendant had anything to say before sentencing. Marcus declined. No apology, no explanation, just silence. It was fitting. Judge Wexler then delivered her sentence. For wire fraud, identity theft, interstate financial exploitation, and use of false documentation, Marcus Wynn was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. The severity of this sentence, she explained, reflects not just the financial harm, but the long-term emotional and psychological manipulation used to carry out these crimes. You didn't just steal money. You exploited hope, intimacy, and trust. In addition, he was ordered to pay $223,000 in restitution to the verified victims, including Vanessa, Janelle Rivers, Brielle Thompson, Marina Lopez, and 4 other women who had submitted sworn financial documentation. The judge acknowledged the likelihood that most of the funds would be unrecoverable, citing the use of prepaid instruments, false LLCs, and closed offshore accounts. Marcus was immediately remanded back to federal custody. He would serve his sentence at FCI Forest City in Arkansas, a medium-security facility specializing in white-collar crimes and identity fraud. As the courtroom emptied, Vanessa remained seated for a long moment, staring at the empty defense table. Her attorney, Angela Parks, gently touched her arm. "It's over," Angela said, but it didn't feel like an ending. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa took a long, overdue break. She stepped away from work, away from Charlotte, and spent time with her family in Raleigh. Her parents welcomed her with quiet support. No questions, no pity, just presence. Her sister rearranged a guest room for her, complete with soft throw blankets and candles that smelled like childhood memories. She needed the stillness. For the first time in years, she could breathe without second-guessing herself. But peace didn't mean silence. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Vanessa received a call from the Wisconsin Coalition for Consumer Justice, a nonprofit that had followed her case after it made national headlines. They asked if she would be willing to participate in an advocacy initiative focused on educating people about financial grooming and non-marital exploitation. She said yes. Vanessa began working with the coalition to create educational materials, videos, brochures, online toolkits. They were aimed at young adults, financial institutions, therapists, and even dating platforms. The message was simple. Financial abuse doesn't always come with bruises. She helped draft guidelines for recognizing red flags. Partners who discourage financial transparency. Unwillingness to create joint accounts despite shared goals. Lack of documentation in major financial agreements. Emotional manipulation tied to money. It felt empowering, like she was rebuilding something, not just for herself, but for others. Soon after, she joined a closed-door policy roundtable in Raleigh. State lawmakers, consumer protection experts, and survivors gathered to propose new legislation. The working title was the Partner Exploitation Awareness and Recovery Act. The bill proposed legal recourse for victims of financial fraud in intimate partnerships, mandatory transparency protocols for financial institutions when accounts are used in multi-party contributions, enhanced fraud screening tools for shell company registrations. Vanessa wasn't a politician, but she didn't need to be. She just had to be honest. In one session, she said, "You don't need a wedding ring to be financially abused. You just need someone who knows exactly how to make you believe in a future that never existed." Her words were quoted in several state news articles. For many readers, they were a revelation. Meanwhile, Marcus went adjusted a life behind bars. According to prison records, he was placed under restricted communication protocols, banned from using internet-enabled devices, and had all outgoing correspondence monitored. Investigators believed he had begun writing a memoir, drafted under yet another alias. What investigators didn't disclose publicly, but was later confirmed through an anonymous source at FCI Forest City, was that Marcus hadn't just been writing a memoir. He'd been shopping it. According to the facility's internal mail log, Marcus had sent at least 6 letters to independent literary agents, all typed on the prison's shared word processor and addressed with variations of his name, A.G. Wynn, J.C. Anthony, and even M.E. Carter. Each letter included a pitch for a book titled The Charmer's Gambit: Love, Lies, and the Hustle Behind It All. In one excerpt, he wrote, "This isn't a story of a con. It's a story of survival, of navigating the modern dating jungle as a man who dared to think 10 steps ahead in a world full of emotional debt and economic predators. I didn't fake love. I redefined it." One agent forwarded the query to a journalist at a major newspaper, who verified the return address and promptly sounded the alarm to victim advocates. Angela Parks was livid. "He's not remorseful," she said to Vanessa during a check-in call. "He's marketing himself, trying to rebrand this as some kind of misunderstood anti-hero journey." Vanessa wasn't surprised. What shocked her more was how carefully curated it all still was, even from a prison cell. He wasn't scribbling regrets in a journal. He was drafting chapters, titling them with phrases like trust equity, false returns, and love as leverage. He wasn't reflecting. He was still calculating. Prison authorities placed him under stricter media monitoring. His access to outgoing correspondence was limited, and his contact list was reviewed quarterly by the Financial Crimes Division. Still, the damage lingered like a bad echo. In one monitored phone call, he reportedly told an old associate, "I've already gone viral. Might as well make it profitable." When Vanessa heard this through Angela, she didn't react at first. Then she muttered, "He's trying to turn a prison sentence into a brand." Angela nodded grimly. "That's why we don't stop speaking." Vanessa didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her voice was already louder than any book pitch he could mail out. And unlike his, hers wasn't fiction disguised as redemption. It was truth built from ruins. Vanessa declined to comment when asked by a podcast host if she feared he would profit from his story. She simply said, "Let him write whatever fiction he wants. I'm living my truth now." That truth meant making changes. She closed every account ever connected to Marcus. Changed her phone number. Deleted their old photos, not out of anger, but to make space. She moved into a new apartment in Durham, closer to her advocacy work and far from the shadows of her past. In January 2023, she was invited to participate in a limited series podcast called Trust Lines, which focused on survivors of financial abuse. The episode featured only her voice. No photos, no dramatic background music. Just Vanessa, speaking calmly, reclaiming the timeline of her own life. In the closing segment, she said, "When someone steals your money, you recover. But when someone steals your sense of direction, your belief in love, in shared goals, that takes longer. And you don't heal by forgetting. You heal by remembering with clarity and choosing never to shrink because of it." By spring 2023, word spread that a major streaming platform had greenlit a limited drama series titled Two Lives, One Lie, based on the case. Producers approached Vanessa for consultation and licensing. She declined. Through her lawyer, she issued a statement. "I've already lived the story. I don't need to watch someone else dramatize my pain. But I hope the show educates. Because the next Vanessa might still think love is supposed to feel like sacrifice." Spring in Durham felt different than it did in Charlotte. It wasn't just the change in scenery. More dogwood trees, quieter streets, fewer memories echoing off familiar corners. It was the air Vanessa breathed, the sense of stillness she carried inside. For the first time in years, her life wasn't shaped around someone else's schedule, lies, or illusions. It was hers. She had started fresh. Her new apartment was smaller, but cozy, with tall windows that let in morning sun and a view of the park across the street. The walls were blank for now, waiting for photos of her life, places she had seen, not someone else's curated facade. She'd bought herself a new couch, splurged on a kitchen island card, and lit vanilla candles each night just because she could. Vanessa still worked part-time at a nearby imaging clinic, but her true focus had shifted. The advocacy work she had taken on after Marcus's sentencing had turned into something much larger, a mission. She wasn't just helping victims recover. She was helping them reclaim. Through the Wisconsin Coalition for Consumer Justice, she began co-authoring a digital toolkit titled Invisible Theft: How to Recognize Financial Grooming in Intimate Relationships. It featured checklists, warning signs, and survivor stories, including her own, anonymously. The toolkit was distributed to college counseling centers, local banks, and even social media platforms that had begun training moderators to recognize scam patterns tied to romance fraud. But Vanessa didn't stop there. With the help of her attorney, Angela Parks, and several policy advisors, she returned to the North Carolina State Assembly in early May to help present the first formal draft of the Partner Exploitation Awareness and Recovery Act. The proposed legislation was bold and controversial. It pushed for mandatory financial transparency laws for shared domestic partnerships exceeding 12 months, civil liability for individuals who use emotional misrepresentation to obtain significant assets, legal classification of intimate fraud as a form of coercive financial control, funding for a state-run financial abuse recovery fund. Some lawmakers were skeptical. "How do you legislate trust?" one asked during a closed-door session. Vanessa responded calmly, "You don't legislate trust. You legislate consequences for those who weaponize it. The line made headlines the next morning. It was reprinted in opinion pieces, quoted in a viral tweet, and eventually referenced during a live TV interview with a state representative who had previously opposed the bill. Public support swelled. By June, 5 states had reached out with interest in replicating the proposed bill. Vanessa had become the unintentional face of a national movement. Still, she never sought the spotlight. She declined every television interview, refused offers to write a memoir, turned down a 5-figure podcast deal that wanted her to recount her story with dramatic beats. She didn't want to be someone's entertainment. She wanted impact. She spent her free hours mentoring survivors in private online forums, sometimes replying to a dozen messages a night from people who had just discovered the person they loved wasn't real, or at least not who they thought. Some messages were short cries for help. Others were essays, raw and rambling, desperate to be heard without judgment. Vanessa responded to all of them with the same message. It wasn't your fault. Love isn't weakness, and your dignity is not gone, just buried beneath someone else's lies. But one message was different. It came from a woman named Danielle Rios, a 29-year-old accountant from San Antonio, Texas. Her email was longer than most, 3 pages if printed. She had written it late one night, she said, after sitting in her car outside her apartment for nearly 2 hours, too ashamed to go inside. Vanessa read the message twice. Danielle said she'd been dating a man named Jay Carter for the past 16 months. He was warm, attentive, good with her nephews, and always had a plan, especially when it came to their future. He had convinced her to put $22,000 into a property investment they were supposedly entering together. But a week after she wired the final amount, he stopped responding. His number disconnected. His Instagram vanished. His apartment was emptied by the time she showed up the next morning with breakfast and a sinking feeling in her chest. I thought I was crazy, Danielle wrote, until I saw your story in that documentary. I paused the screen, and I swear to God, he smiled the same way. That same damn smirk. Vanessa replied with her usual message. But Danielle messaged back almost instantly. Can I talk to you? Like actually talk. They scheduled a call for the following night. Vanessa wasn't sure what to expect. She'd spoken to many survivors through email or private forums, but rarely in real time. When the phone rang, Vanessa's hands trembled just slightly. Hey, Danielle's voice came through the speaker, soft and cautious. I hope this isn't weird. It's not weird, Vanessa said gently. You're not alone. I promise. There was silence for a moment. Then Danielle exhaled a shaky laugh. I feel stupid. You're not stupid, Vanessa replied. You were targeted. They talked for over an hour. Danielle's voice broke several times, especially when recounting the moment she realized the apartment was empty. I just kept knocking, she said. Like if I knocked hard enough, he'd appear and say it was all a joke. Vanessa listened, patiently, quietly. She didn't rush to offer platitudes. She simply stayed on the line, present. At one point, Danielle said, I keep going over every little thing I missed, every red flag I should have caught. Vanessa paused, then asked gently, Can I tell you something I learned the hard way? Yeah. They're not red flags when you're still learning what love is supposed to feel like. They're confetti. They're tiny promises. They only look like warnings when you're standing far enough away. The line went quiet. Then Danielle whispered, Thank you. Before they hung up, Vanessa gave her contact info for a local victim support group, the name of a civil attorney in Texas, and told her call again if she ever needed. When the call ended, Vanessa sat with her phone on her lap, staring at the ceiling. She realized something then. For all the grief Marcus had caused, for all the nights she'd spent unraveling his lies, he no longer had the final word. Not in her story, not in Danielle's, not in any woman's who now saw through the silence. They weren't victims anymore. They were each other's witnesses. And sometimes that was the beginning of real recovery. One evening in late summer, she received a letter in the mail from a college student in Michigan. The girl had read about Vanessa in an article on emotional financial abuse and recognized her own situation. She wrote that Vanessa's story had saved her from something that felt like a trap disguised as love. Vanessa cried for the first time in months. Not from pain, but from purpose. That fall, the legislation passed its first major hurdle, a committee approval with bipartisan support. A public hearing was scheduled for November. Vanessa was invited to testify. She wore a dark green blazer, brought printed notes, but never looked at them once. She told her story plainly, without drama. She didn't vilify Marcus by name. She didn't need to. She simply explained how a system that protects houses, cars, and contract had left hearts and futures unprotected. "I'm not asking you to write laws that stop bad people," she said, pausing briefly. "I'm asking you to write laws that give good people a chance to fight back." The chamber fell silent. Then came the applause, not from lawmakers but from survivors sitting behind her in the gallery. It was a rare moment in government, clarity without politics. Later that week, Vanessa met Angela for coffee. They sat under a large patio umbrella, sipping cappuccinos, watching the sun settle low over the trees. "You ever think about what comes next?" Angela asked. Vanessa smiled. "I think this is next." Angela tilted her head. Vanessa continued, "I'm not trying to move on anymore." That phrase always made it sound like I was supposed to erase what happened. But I don't want to move on. I want to move forward with it. Smarter, stronger, still whole. Angela nodded, a rare softness in her eyes. "That's the most honest thing I've heard all week." Vanessa laughed. Not bitterly, not cautiously, but fully. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't feel like someone rebuilding a life that was broken. She felt like someone building a life that was hers. From scratch, on her terms. By the spring of 2024, Vanessa Cole's name had quietly become synonymous with something much larger than survival. She was no longer just the woman whose fiancé stole $72,000 and married someone else. She had become a symbol for those whose trauma couldn't be photographed, those whose abuse didn't leave bruises, only bank statements and broken trust. In March, after months of deliberations, revisions, and impassioned hearings, the North Carolina State Assembly passed the Partner Exploitation Awareness and Recovery Act with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislation was a landmark. It redefined financial fraud within intimate partnerships, even in non-marital relationships, as a recognized form of coercive abuse. It provided victims access to legal remedies, state-funded recovery assistance, and protections against future exploitation. It also made it easier to subpoena financial records in cases involving romantic fraud, something that had once required impossible burdens of proof. On the day the governor signed it into law, Vanessa stood in the back of the press room. Not behind the podium, not in front of cameras, but among the people she fought for. She didn't speak publicly. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. That same month, 2 other states, Illinois and Georgia, introduced near-identical bills inspired by the North Carolina model. Advocacy groups began using Vanessa's case as part of training materials for counselors, police departments, and even fraud divisions at major banks. But Vanessa remained rooted in simplicity. She still lived in her apartment in Durham, still worked part-time at the clinic, still answered messages from survivors late at night. Her routine was her anchor, coffee at 8 a.m., advocacy calls in the afternoon, long walks in the evening with her rescue dog, Hazel. Casper had passed away quietly just before Christmas. It was one of the few things Marcus hadn't tainted. Hazel, a brown-eyed pit mix with a crooked tail, came from a shelter where the staff had named her Faith. Vanessa kept the name. It felt right. In May, she was invited to a university panel at Duke Law titled Consent, Contracts, and the Gray Space of Relationship Fraud. At first, she hesitated. It wasn't that she didn't want to speak. It was the fear that her story would be turned into a spectacle again. But the invitation came from a student whose older sister had been a victim of financial grooming. The message was personal, heartfelt. Vanessa accepted. She sat on stage next to legal scholars, psychologists, and consumer protection experts. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't use legal language or statistics. She didn't recite policy. Instead, she told them this. Everyone talks about the red flags, what to avoid, but no one talks about the green ones, the signs of hope that someone uses to pull you in. He didn't lie to me from the start. He listened. He mirrored my dreams. He used honesty like a fishing line. And by the time I realized what was happening, I wasn't just deceived, I was invested. That's what makes this kind of abuse so invisible. It's not loud. It's quiet. It sounds like "I love you." The room was silent. A few students wiped tears. One professor stood to applaud. After the event, several attendees approached her, not to ask for photos or interviews, but simply to say thank you. Vanessa realized then that her story no longer belonged to Marcus or the courtroom or even the advocacy work. It belonged to every woman, every man, every person who had ever wondered if they were crazy for feeling used, isolated, or misled in a relationship that never felt quite right. That summer, a documentary titled Love, Fraud, and Fallout premiered on a major streaming platform. It chronicled cases of romantic financial exploitation across the country, with Vanessa's story featured in episode 3, retold through court documents, news clippings, and narration. She didn't appear on camera, but she had reviewed the script, approved the facts, and consulted on the survivor impact messaging. It was her way of ensuring accuracy and dignity. The series sparked national conversation. Media outlets began using terms like romantic fraud, intimacy scams, and emotional asset theft. Banks started flagging suspicious joint contributions in accounts with no legal relationship between parties. Support groups saw record enrollment. 1 month after the documentary aired, Vanessa received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten. "I saw your story. I thought I was alone. I haven't told anyone what happened to me, not even my sister. But after watching, I finally reported him. Thank you for showing me that it wasn't my fault." There was no return address, just initials, Mem. Vanessa folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box in her closet. A box labeled "Proof I'm still here." Inside were other things. Her court badge from the trial, a photo of her with Hazel, and a crumpled napkin from the cafe where she first wrote her victim statement. Proof not of survival, but of continuance. One evening in September, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Vanessa sat on her porch with Hazel at her feet and a book in her lap. She watched the light change, golden and soft, painting the sky in a hue she once thought she'd forgotten how to appreciate. She thought about the word legacy. Most people think it's what you leave behind when you're gone. But Vanessa had come to understand something different. Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what you build while still standing. It's how you show others the cracks in the world and then hand them the tools to fix it. For years, Marcus had written the narrative, spun the lies, crafted the illusion, pulled the strings. But not anymore. This was her story now, and she would never let anyone steal it again.